For nearly 2 decades, it was a ghost, invisible, untouchable. A black shape that slipped through the most heavily defended skies on Earth, struck its target, and vanished before anyone even knew it was there. Radar screens stayed quiet. Missile batteries slept. Fighter pilots never even got a lock. The F-117 Nighthawk was not just an aircraft. It was a myth wrapped in classified files, a flying proof that technology had finally defeated physics. During the Gulf War, it flew straight into Baghdad, the most defended airspace on the planet, and came back untouched. No losses, no damage, no equal. And then came March 27, 1999. A cold Balkan night, low clouds, rain in the air, and somewhere over Serbia, a quiet radar operator stared at a flicker on his screen that shouldn't have been there. Minutes later, the impossible happened. The stealth fighter fell from the sky in flames. The world would wake up to a shocking headline: stealth jet shot down. How did a 1960s-era air defense system destroy the most advanced aircraft ever built? Was it luck, a mistake, or proof that even ghosts can bleed? This is the true story of how a Nighthawk was shot down. The birth of an untouchable phantom. The story begins not in Serbia, but decades earlier. In the darkest years of the Cold War, when the sky itself became a battlefield of paranoia. In the late 1960s, American military planners faced a terrifying reality. Soviet air defenses were getting smarter, faster, and deadlier. Surface-to-air missiles had already proven their power by shooting down U-2 spy planes. Any future war would mean bombers flying into walls of radar and missiles. Traditional speed and altitude were no longer enough. The answer came from an unlikely place: math. A Soviet scientist named Pyotr Yefimtsev published obscure research on how radar waves bounced off flat surfaces. His work suggested something revolutionary. That shape mattered more than material. An aircraft, if designed with the right angles, could scatter radar waves instead of reflecting them back. The Soviets ignored it. The Americans didn't. At Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works, engineers quietly took Yefimtsev's equations and turned them into something the world had never seen. Not sleek, not aerodynamic, but deadly in a new way. The result looked like it came from another planet: sharp edges, flat panels, a faceted body that made pilots joke it flew like a brick. But radar screens saw almost nothing. They called it F-117 Nighthawk, though technically it wasn't a fighter at all. It carried no guns, no air-to-air missiles. Its only defense was invisibility. From the beginning, secrecy was absolute. Pilots trained at night in the Nevada desert. Aircraft were hidden in hangars by day. Even other Air Force units didn't know what they were seeing. When black triangles slipped silently overhead. When the Nighthawk finally revealed itself during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, it was a revelation. While hundreds of aircraft attacked Iraqi defenses, F-117s flew straight into the heart of Baghdad. They destroyed command bunkers, radar stations, and government buildings, often within meters of civilian structures, without being detected. Not a single one was lost. The legend was born. By the late 1990s, the Nighthawk had become a symbol of American technological supremacy. NATO planners believed stealth aircraft could operate with near impunity. Older air defense systems were dismissed as obsolete relics of the Cold War. But in Yugoslavia, one man was quietly preparing for war, and he did not believe in myths. The Serbian commander who refused to believe, Colonel Zoltan Dani, commander of the 250th Air Defense Missile Brigade, knew his equipment was outdated. His main weapon, the S-125 Neva, was designed in the early 1960s. Against modern jets, it was considered almost useless. But Dani understood something many others forgot. Technology does not win wars alone. People do. He studied NATO tactics obsessively. He read Western military journals. He learned how stealth aircraft operated, not just technically, but psychologically. He understood that stealth did not mean invisible. It meant harder to detect, and harder was not the same as impossible. The key was discipline. Serbian radar operators were trained to use their systems in short bursts, switching on only for seconds at a time. This reduced the risk of NATO anti-radiation missiles homing in on them. They also modified their radars, experimenting with longer wavelengths, which were less affected by stealth shaping. Most importantly, Danny knew NATO pilots followed predictable patterns. Stealth aircraft flew similar routes, at similar altitudes, often at the same times, because mission planning favored consistency and safety. Predictability creates opportunity. By March 1999, NATO's air campaign against Yugoslavia was in full force. Night after night, aircraft crossed Serbian skies. Bombs fell. Bridges burned. Radar stations were destroyed. And somewhere in the darkness, Danny waited. The night of March 27, the weather that night was terrible. Rain clouds hung low over the countryside, forcing aircraft to fly lower than usual. For stealth jets, this was dangerous. Their designs were optimized for higher altitudes. Lower flight increased radar exposure and reduced maneuvering room. Inside his command vehicle, Danny sensed something different. At approximately 8:40 p.m., Serbian radar operators detected a faint, unstable signal. Not a solid track, just a whisper. A flicker that appeared and disappeared. To most crews, it would have meant nothing. To Danny, it meant everything. He ordered silence. No transmissions. No radar emissions. They waited. Seconds later, the radar blinked again. This time, Danny gave the order. Radar on. Target lock. Missiles ready. The operators worked fast, trained for this exact moment. The radar stayed active for only a few seconds, just long enough to calculate a firing solution. Then Danny spoke the words that would echo through aviation history. Fire. When the ghost became visible, 2 missiles leapt from their launch rails, cutting through the rain-soaked darkness. They were not smart weapons by modern standards. No advanced seekers. No digital magic, just speed, explosives, and a calculated gamble. In the cockpit of F-117 tail number 820806, Lieutenant Colonel Dale Zelko had no warning. His aircraft had flown similar missions before. Same route, same confidence. Then the sky exploded. A proximity fuse detonated near the left wing. Shrapnel tore through the fragile stealth skin. The Nighthawk shuddered violently. Systems failed. Control vanished. Zelko ejected as the aircraft spiraled downward, crashing into a field near the village of Budanovci. The stealth era had just suffered its first combat loss. The pilot who fell from the invisible sky. The explosion came without warning. One moment. Lieutenant Colonel Dale Zelko was gliding through hostile airspace inside what was supposed to be the safest combat aircraft ever built. The next moment, the cockpit filled with alarms, flashing lights, and a violent shudder that felt as if the sky itself had punched the Nighthawk out of existence. Training took over. There was no time to think, no time to question how the impossible had happened. Zelko reached for the ejection handle as the aircraft rolled uncontrollably, its stealth skin tearing apart under forces it was never designed to endure. The ejection was brutal. The canopy blew away, the seat fired upward, and in a fraction of a second Zelko was ripped from the cockpit into freezing, rain-soaked darkness. The Nighthawk, once the pride of American air power, fell away beneath him, burning, breaking, and finally vanishing into the Serbian countryside in a fireball that briefly lit up the clouds. As his parachute opened, Zelko became painfully aware of a truth no stealth pilot was ever meant to face. He was alone, behind enemy lines, in the middle of a war. He hit the ground hard, landing in muddy farmland not far from where the aircraft had crashed. The rain, which had helped betray his jet, now became his only ally. Zelko dragged himself away from the landing site, burying his parachute, disabling his survival radio except for brief, coded transmissions, and pressing himself into the earth. Serbian search teams were already moving. He could hear vehicles, dogs, voices shouting in the distance. Every sound felt amplified. Every second stretched unbearably long. For more than 6 hours, Zelko remained hidden, barely moving, controlling his breathing, fighting panic. The Serbian military and local villagers searched the area aggressively. To them, capturing a stealth pilot would be a propaganda victory beyond imagination. To Zelko, survival depended on patience and discipline. He resisted the urge to move, even when the cold seeped into his bones, and the ground beneath him turned into thick mud. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, NATO command was in shock. NATO wakes up to the unthinkable. At first, there was denial. Stealth aircraft were not supposed to be shot down. The idea alone threatened years of doctrine, billions of dollars, and the psychological edge NATO relied upon. Initial reports spoke of a missing aircraft. Then came the confirmation. Radar tracks lost. Communication silent. An emergency beacon detected, faint, intermittent, and moving. The truth was unavoidable. An F-117 had been hit. Within minutes, the rescue machine activated. Combat search and rescue units were launched from bases in Italy. H-60 Pavehawk helicopters, escorted by A-10 Thunderbolts and fighter jets, raced toward Serbian airspace. Electronic warfare aircraft flooded the sky with jamming signals, blinding radars, confusing missile operators, turning the night into a storm of invisible noise. For the Serbians, the sudden surge in NATO air activity was a clear sign. The pilot was alive. Colonel Zoltan Dani ordered his units to stay hidden. He knew better than to challenge NATO's rescue forces directly. His victory was already complete. The jet was down. The myth was cracked. Now survival, his and his men's, was what mattered. Back on the ground, Zelko received the coded signal he had been waiting for. Rescue forces were inbound, but getting out would be just as dangerous as going in. The most dangerous 20 minutes. As NATO helicopters approached, Serbian air defenses came alive. Tracer fire arced into the sky. Anti-aircraft guns thundered. Missiles searched blindly through the darkness, hunting anything that dared to move. Zelko signaled his position with an infrared strobe, invisible to the naked eye but clear to friendly forces. The Pavehawk descended fast, hovering just long enough for the crew to grab him. Seconds later, they were gone, racing low and fast back toward safety, as Serbian gunners fired desperately into the night. The entire extraction lasted less than 20 minutes. It felt like an eternity. When Zelko finally crossed into friendly airspace, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. He was alive. His aircraft was not. And the world would never look at stealth the same way again. The race for the wreckage, while NATO celebrated the rescue. Another battle was already underway on the ground. Serbian forces, villagers, and intelligence officers rushed to the crash site. The wreckage of the F-117 lay scattered across fields, twisted metal, burned composites, fragments of radar, absorbing material that had once been among the most closely guarded secrets in the world. Within hours, pieces of the aircraft were hidden, transported, cataloged. Some were displayed openly as trophies. Others vanished into secure facilities. There were persistent rumors, never officially confirmed, that fragments were quietly shared with Russia and China, allowing rival powers to study the weaknesses of American stealth technology. Whether true or not, the damage was done. Stealth was no longer a mystery. It was a problem to be solved. The strategic shockwave, NATO continued its air campaign, but changes were immediate. Flight routes varied. Altitudes changed. Electronic warfare increased. The F-117s themselves were pulled back temporarily. Their missions reduced, their invincibility questioned. For Serbia, the shootdown became a symbol of resistance. For NATO, it was a wake-up call. And for military planners worldwide, it was proof that no weapon, no matter how advanced, is immune to adaptation. Colonel Dani would later say something simple, almost humble. We did not defeat stealth, we defeated predictability. The war in Yugoslavia would continue. NATO would eventually prevail. But the psychological balance had shifted. The ghost had been seen, and it had fallen. The day the world realized stealth was not invisible, when the news broke. It spread quietly at first. There was no dramatic press conference, no immediate explanation. Just a short, carefully worded statement. A NATO aircraft was lost during operations over Yugoslavia. But behind closed doors, alarms were ringing. Military analysts, defense contractors, and intelligence agencies across the world understood the significance immediately. This was not just the loss of an aircraft. This was the first confirmed combat shootdown of a stealth jet. Within days, the images appeared. Grainy photographs of jagged black wreckage displayed in Serbian museums, fragments of the once feared Nighthawk hanging like relics. For allies of the United States, it was uncomfortable. For rivals, it was electrifying. And for smaller nations watching from the sidelines, it was empowering. The message was clear. The king could bleed. How stealth really failed. Contrary to popular belief, stealth did not stop working. That night, the F-117 was not suddenly visible like a conventional fighter. What failed was a system built on assumptions. Assumptions that the enemy would be technologically inferior, predictable, and afraid. Stealth reduces radar cross-section. It does not erase it. Older radars operating on longer wavelengths could still detect anomalies, faint returns that looked like noise to the untrained eye. Colonel Zoltan Dani trained his crews to look for those imperfections. He understood that stealth aircraft relied on controlled exposure. When forced to fly lower, through bad weather, along repeated routes, their margin of safety narrowed dramatically. Even the Nighthawk's own design played a role. It had no radar warning receiver capable of detecting the S-125's guidance radar. It had no defensive maneuvers beyond avoidance. Once targeted, it was vulnerable. In short, stealth failed not because it was weak, but because it was alone. The global military shock, Russia and China paid close attention. Publicly, they dismissed the shoot-down as a fluke. Privately, they dissected every available detail. Air defense doctrine shifted. Research into counter-stealth technologies accelerated. Long-wave radar systems, passive detection networks, infrared tracking, all received renewed funding. The United States responded just as seriously. Stealth would no longer operate in isolation. Future aircraft would integrate stealth with electronic warfare, data fusion drones, and real-time intelligence sharing. Survivability would become layered, not singular. The lessons of Serbia directly influenced the design and doctrine behind aircraft like the F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II. Unlike the F-117, these jets could fight back, maneuver aggressively, and share battlefield awareness across entire networks. The era of the lone ghost was over. The era of the stealth pack had begun. The men on opposite sides, years after the war, something extraordinary happened. Dale Zelko, the American pilot who had fallen from the sky, met Colonel Zoltan Dani, the man who had ordered the missile launch. There was no anger, no bitterness, only quiet respect between two professionals who had done their duty. They shook hands. In that moment, the story came full circle. Not as a tale of victory or defeat, but as a reminder of the human element that no technology can erase. Dani had beaten stealth with patience, intelligence, and discipline. Zelko had survived with training, calm, and resilience. Both were products of their systems. Both were human. Why this moment still matters today? Stealth aircraft fly over contested skies once again. They are smarter, more connected, more protected. But the lesson of March 27, 1999 still echoes in every mission briefing and every design review. No weapon is invincible. No system is flawless. And no enemy should ever be underestimated. The F-117 Nighthawk was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be a first step. And like all first steps, it stumbled so others could run. That night over Serbia did not end stealth. It proved it mattered. Because once something is worth countering, it is powerful. Cinematic outro. The ghost that changed the sky. In the darkness, the Nighthawk once ruled unseen. In a flash of fire, it fell. And in its fall, it reshaped the future of war. Stealth did not die that night. It grew wiser. If you want to understand modern air combat, if you want to see how myths are broken and rebuilt, this is where the story begins. Call to action. If this story surprised you, if you learned something new about modern warfare, like this video, subscribe for more cinematic military documentaries, and comment below. Do you think stealth aircraft will remain dominant, or is a new revolution coming? The sky is watching. That night over Serbia proved one timeless truth. No matter how advanced the machine, no matter how powerful the technology, war is still decided by human minds. The F-117 Nighthawk was never truly invisible. It was simply misunderstood, and when patience met predictability, the ghost fell from the sky. This was not the end of stealth. It was the moment the world learned to fear it properly. And if you enjoy cinematic military documentaries like this, subscribe now, because the next story might be even more unbelievable.